The Terran Union heavy cruiser, Roanoke, had spent the last 6 months raiding Nalek's supply lines in the Flores sector. They were finally returning to Terran space for some much-needed refit and some R&R. But first, they were stopping at the Battery space station orbiting MSAR-4. She would be meeting a Terran Union squadron to escort her prizes back to the Couster system. 4 freighters, a massive ore hauler, and a damaged Nalex corvette that answered a distress call sooner than expected. The Roanoke was one of the new Grenville-class heavy cruisers, faster and more heavily armed than the other heavy cruiser classes operating as part of a Terran Union fleet. They were designed as solo raiders able to operate deep in enemy space, raiding enemy supply lines and facilities. Their design included several newly developed systems, including a new style of radiator for dumping excess heat. At 500 m long and painted black as night, she was very intimidating to see on visual screens and even more so at close range. Her Karakoni, chromium, cobalt, and nickel hull was covered in 12 of ablative armor covered in a black laser-resistant material able to reduce the effectiveness of enemy sensors and target locks. The experimental Baxter radiators efficiently released excess heat into space but still left them exposed to radiation detection sensors. Captain Joseph Krall had been handpicked to command the Roanoke when she came into service 18 months ago. He was a popular officer with 20 years of combat experience on just about every ship in the Terran Union's Navy. He'd also provided technical assistance during its design phase, so his familiarity with the ship made him the best choice for putting the ship through her paces. This would be the very first voyage behind enemy lines as a raider, and it had been a rousing success, hitting targets deep in Nal-X space as reprisal for Nalxian raids on Terran border colonies. The first Nal-X Terran war had devastated both species and left them vulnerable to outside forces. The war wasn't won so much as winding down to a series of raids and counter-raiding, a gentleman's agreement to prevent raids and border skirmishes from turning into another full-scale war and the earlier consequences. And Captain Krall was very good at approaching that line in the sand without going over it. Several centuries earlier, he'd have been a privateer sailing the oceans on Earth. This even led to the revival of the old pirate movies of the 20th century, but Captain Krall preferred likening it to the submarine warfare of the first half of the 20th century. That didn't stop his crew from giving him a robot parrot. He claims to hate it, but everyone knows he's been teaching it his extensive vocabulary of curse words in dozens of languages, that he loved it. And if you call him out on him walking around with it on his shoulder, he'll claim he was just humoring the crew. Captain Krall was relieved to see the Terran squadron had arrived before him and ordered his little fleet to dock. It would be good to be able to get off the ship and move around without weapons. As Captain Krall exited the ship, he was surprised to see Commodore Allen waiting for him. It had been several years since he last saw his friend and previous XO. Taking his prerogative as a captain, he skipped the formalities, shook hands, and gave Commodore Allen a friendly slap on the back. "Mike? What the hell are you doing here? This escort job is for a lieutenant to do," he asked. "I was in the neighborhood and volunteered. I wanted to see this new ship of yours, and it's been too long since we got a drink together." Mike replied. Captain Krall took a glance back to his ship and wasn't surprised to see his current XO, Lieutenant Commander Nana Ricci, had the resupply well in hand. With a big grin, Captain Krall said, "Let me see to my guests and we can see if we can scandalize the ratings like we used to." Captain Krall approached the waiting station manager. The Battery bowed in the formal greeting of her people. Not having the tentacles needed to return the bow, he just saluted her. "Greetings, Captain Krall of the Terrans. How may we be of service?" the Battery asked. "Greetings, Ananu of the Battery. We request the use of your services," he replied, finishing the ritual greeting. "I see you returned successful in your raiding," Ananu said. "How many bunks will you need?" Unsurprised that the Battery knew his mission, he replied, 72 bunks with 3 more for your medbay, if you have the room." One of the most important functions provided by the Battery was allowing for the return of captives taken in raids. This helped to keep things calmer by freely releasing captives to limit the amount of bad blood created during the raids and conflicts. Crates of supplies, ammo, missiles, and the various other things needed to keep the ship functioning were being transferred from the smaller Terran ships. With her weapon complement being only slightly smaller than a battleship, she could go through a lot of ammunition. Even without being in serious combat, he liked to run frequent gunnery drills. Some captains would just let their tactical computers handle operating the weapon systems and just have the gunnery crews handle reloads. But some hard lessons taught him that having the gunnery crews able to take direct control, as needed, was essential. He preferred to use up as much ammunition as needed during training to save lives later in combat. Seeing everything in hand, he walked back to join his friend for a drink. They caught up on the doings of old friends and Mike's family, toasts to fallen comrades, and eventually to the Roanoke. "How did she operate on her first long-range mission?" Mike asked. Taking a moment to organize his thoughts, Captain Crowell took a sip of his drink. "She handled better than expected. The new engine behaved itself, surprising for being just off the drawing board. The Baxters were damn efficient." Taking another sip before continuing, "We didn't use the torpedoes or the turreted railguns in combat, but the rest performed as expected. That corvette didn't stand a chance, so we didn't get a full test of all the combat systems. Going by the number of munitions I brought with me, you'd think I was resupplying a battleship," Mike joked. "Just about," Captain Crowell chuckled. "During the design phase, I had to argue for such an increase of armament. It seemed to take forever for them to get it through their thick skulls that we'd be out there all alone and couldn't call for reinforcements. So I convinced them to put the 2 particle beam systems in the bow of the ship and give me the 4 torpedo tubes. They had no problem with the pair at the bow, but they couldn't figure out why I wanted a pair aft. I swear I thought about launching them out of a tube. At least they were starting to get it when I upgunned the turrets to carry 2 large railguns. They did get upset at wanting to put on a turret in the middle of the ventral side, but were relieved I left the other turret on the dorsal side ahead of the command structures," Commodore Allen asked. "From the glimpse I got as you docked, it looked like you doubled the usual weapon systems?" "She still has them 10 secondary batteries, but I went with dual medium railguns for them," Captain Crowell replied. "I put 4 of the quad-mounted autocannons on each side of the ship. It should let us save wear and tear on the railguns when we catch unarmed ships or against incoming fighters." "I understand, and it also saves on missiles, which with 4 heavy and 8 medium is a lot of missiles to carry," Commodore Allen replied. "I've also heard you were running tests on a more powerful deflector array to do more than just protect against radiation and small debris. Like maybe actual shields that would work on anything smaller than a battleship?" "Yeah, but not with any success," Captain Crowell answered. "Anytime we tried to go past the standard low-power output, it played hell with our sensors." It was at that moment when Captain Crowell's wrist communicator beeped for his attention. "Just a second, Mike," he said as he keyed the communicator. "Crowell, go ahead." The sound of Lieutenant Commander Ritchie's voice came through the speaker. "Priority message from the bridge, Captain." "What is the message?" Captain Crowell asked, not liking the way Ritchie's voice sounded worried. "Sensor buoy reports large Nalex fleet dropping out of FTL, 2 million kilometers out," Ritchie reported. Commodore Allen gave Captain Crowell the same concerned look that he was sure was on his face. "How many?" the captain asked. Ritchie hesitated for a moment before answering. 37 ships with more arriving every couple of minutes." Commodore Allen swore. Captain Crowell looked at his friend. "How long until you get your crews and get out of here?" Commodore Allen thought for a moment. "Maybe 20 minutes at the minimum." Captain Crowell muttered to himself, "They'll be here before that." Both men got up, signaled to any of their personnel in the bar, and started out the door. "I'll buy you the time, but I'll need to undock as soon as I get aboard my ship. Maybe I can catch them off guard." Captain Crowell. Commodore Allen replied, "That's a suicide mission. There are too many for one ship to handle." "Yeah, I know, old friend, but if I don't, then we all die," Captain Crowell explained. "Do me a favor. I'm going to send you my non-essential personnel. Take them and those still on the station with you. Get them home." Reaching the hatch to the docking bay, both men stopped to shake hands. "Of course, Joseph," Commodore Allen replied, "but if anyone can find a way out of it, it's you, my friend." After a final salute, both men parted ways to reach their ship. As Captain Crowell jogged down the docking bay, he sent orders for Ritchie to send all non-essential personnel to Commodore Allen and asked if they had sufficient hands to man all combat stations. Ritchie's reply reassured him. "Aye, sir. Most of the crew on the station are from the second watch, and the few people from the first watch are non-essential." Be ready to launch as soon as I get aboard, he ordered. He passed several members of his crew, en route to join Commodore Allen. He stopped to return their salute. At the disappointed look in their eyes, he told them, I know you don't want to leave the ship, but the Commodore needs some real sailors to get out on time. You know how those logistic guys are. They'll get lost trying to find their own bridge. That look reassured them, and after a final salute, they headed down the dock to join Commodore Allen. Captain Crowell reached the cargo ramp and started up it, calling Richie and telling her to shove off, and he'd be on the bridge shortly. He sprinted down the corridor, leaping over the lower lips of the vacuum-tight doors. "Captain on the bridge!" rang out from one of the bridge techs. Aside from the guards and his XO, the rest of the bridge crew kept working, nodding his approval at their knowing when to discard ceremony for action. He walked over toward his console before speaking. "What do we have, Lieutenant Commander?" Turning to face him, Captain Crowell could see just how worried she was. "Current count is 48 ships." Touching the console's keys to bring up a list of ships before continuing, 18 capital ships and a mix of subcaps, still trying to ID them. "They're just maintaining position for now." Richie finished, her voice slightly puzzled. "They're waiting for something or someone," Captain Crowell answered the unasked question. "How many crew did we leave behind?" 641, sir, the XO replied. "Helm, are we clear of the station's shielding?" "Almost, sir," the helmsman answered. "Thank you." Captain Crowell returned. Turning to another tech, he said, "Sound battle stations." "Sir," one of his sensor techs spoke up, "we have 2 more ships arriving." "Thank you, Ensign," Captain Crowell returned. "What class are they?" Lieutenant Commander Richie asked. After looking at her monitor again, the tech replied, "1 heavy cruiser and something much bigger, waiting for the computer to ID it." Captain Crowell moved to look over the tech's shoulder before standing up and facing his XO. "Fleet Command ship," he informed the tech and his XO. Lieutenant Commander Richie replied, "What the hell is one doing out here?" "Good question," he answered, "and now that the players are on the field, the game can begin." Bringing up the sensor information to his console, Captain Crowell pointed at the enemy fleet. "They haven't begun to deploy into battle formation yet." "That could be our chance," raising his head to look at his XO. "If we jump now, we can land close and surprise them. After we land, we drive into the center of their formation and head for that big bastard," he explained. "But, sir, we haven't fully tested the jump drive." The XO exclaimed. "No time like the present," Captain Crowell joked. "We'll let the railguns and autocannon crews pick targets of opportunity while we engage the command ship with our particle cannons, heavy railguns, and torpedoes," he stated. "What about its point defense system? Won't it pick off the torps?" The XO asked. "We're going to launch all the hammerheads at it. It should overwhelm the system and let the torps through," he answered before continuing. "I'm going to save the heavy missiles for now. You'll need to calculate the launch time of the hammerheads to hit the point defense system as close to the time for the torpedoes to sneak through," he ordered. "But not so far they take out the hammerheads too soon and let them hit the torps, but not so close they set them off either." Looking at his XO, "You better get down to tactical, Nana. This is going to get ugly, and it's best we split up." Captain Crowell commanded, exchanging salutes. Richie simply replied, "Aye, sir," and started for the hatch. Just before stepping through, she turned and said, "Good luck, sir." "What's the status of the Commodore's squad?" Captain Crowell asked. One of his communication techs spoke up. "They need 10 more minutes. Let me know the minute they are clear." Captain Crowell turned to comms tech and ordered, "Intra-ship comms, if you please, Ensign." "Aye, sir," the tech replied before turning to his console and speaking into the mic. Now hear this, message from the captain." "Well, folks, this isn't the fight I wanted, but this is the fight we got," Captain Crowell started. "I'm sure you've heard scuttlebutt about the situation, but here it is. We are facing a superior force numbering 49 ships, and we need to give the Commodore's squadron time to go to FTL and get the hell out of here." He paused before continuing. "The plan is to mix it up with the enemy at close range. They aren't in battle formation yet, so we can hurt them. Good luck, and let's make them regret fucking with the Roanoke." The sounds of cheers came back over the speakers. Helm, are we clear of the station shielding? The captain asked. At the affirmative given by the helmsman, he just nodded. Touching a button on his console, he asked, "Are you in place, XO?" "Aye, sir." The lieutenant commander replied, "As soon as we land, be ready to open up with the dual and quad mounts," he ordered. The XO replied with an affirmative. "Helm, at my command, jump between 25 to 50 km to the starboard of the fleet. As soon as we land, hard to port and get us in the middle of them. Be ready for rapid maneuvers. Maybe we can throw off their laser battery tracking systems. Might let us survive a little longer," Captain Krall ordered. "Aye, sir," the helmsman replied. Taking a quick look around to make sure his crew was ready, he turned back to wait for the signal the jump drive was ready. At the signal, he ordered jump. He felt the ship lurch forward and shudder. It took less than 5 seconds to jump from the station to within the targeted range, but it felt like forever. And then they were less than 5 km from an enemy battleship. "Oh, shit!" exclaimed the helmsman and steered to avoid it. Captain Krall hit a moment of panic with a joke. "Someone make note that the jump drive targeting system needs work." His joke brought a chuckle from his crew and got them back to focus on the taste. Stabbing a button on his console, he ordered, "XO, fire secondary batteries." There was nothing to see or hear from the massive volleys of the secondary batteries coming to life, but he knew the gun crews were already raining devastation on enemy warships. "Helm, hard to port," he ordered, not tearing his view away from the main view screen. Captain Krall looked at his console at the images sent to the bridge from the various gun cameras. He could see the flashes of light from projectiles hitting their shields. He watched as other high-velocity projectiles punched through their hulls. He could just make out the impact of the explosive-tipped slugs fired by the autocannons. Captain Krall turned back to the main view screen. "Hard to starboard. Head for that big son of a bitch," he ordered. The Naoks were slow to respond, but they began to return fire, with some trying to gain some distance to clear the line of fire of other ships. The helmsman's evasive maneuvers were also giving the enemy's gunners fits from repeated misses. But the damage sensors on the armor told of an increasing number of hits as the Naoks began to respond in an organized manner. The resistance coating reduced the damage from the Naoks laser batteries, but didn't completely nullify it. "Helm, get me a clear shot at the command ship." The captain ordered. A bright flash to starboard marked the death of an enemy cruiser. Status reports listed 2 subcapitals holed and venting atmosphere. Dead or damaged, they were out of the fight. One capital ship was dead in space, with another missing its bow. 5 down, too damn many to go. The captain muttered. He watched and waited, ignoring damage alarms and the occasional shudder as shots began to get through the armor and explosively decompress a compartment when they penetrated the hull. He finally saw what he wanted, an unobstructed line of fire to the command ship. His finger smashed down on the console button. "XO, launch torpedoes. Take the gloves off the main batteries. Drop the hammer." He watched the glitter of the particle beams as they bridged the gap between the Roanoke and the Naoks ship. In a moment, he caught sight of the torpedoes' thrusters as they left the tubes and picked up momentum. Holes and brief explosions marked the impact of his weapons, but the sheer volume of Naoksian fire was beginning to take its toll. The armor was failing or had failed in over a dozen spots. 3. Autocannon and 1 railgun mount were out of commission. 2 minutes after they launched the torpedoes, the sight of more than 100 Hammerhead missiles was marked by the flare of their drives. Another volley of Hammerheads was launched the moment new missiles were lifted into the racks. Captain Krall called down to tactical, "XO, hold off on another volley for Hammerheads." Checking his console, "Launch Shrikes at targets of opportunity with no shields, rear tubes target enemy capital ships, and hope those torpedoes get through," he ordered. Multiple small explosions let him know the point defense systems were taking on the Hammerheads, and a moment later, a pair of massive explosions told him the nuclear-tipped torpedoes had hit their target. "Captain, the Commodore's squadron has escaped," one of his techs announced. "Thank you," he answered. "Distance to command ship?" he asked. 250 kilometers, sir," was the reply. "Helm, continue advancing on the command ship and pass her on our port side. We'll give her a broadside and go to FTL after we clear." A tech from the damage control position spoke up. "Captain, FTL is down and jump drive is destroyed." Ah, hell, cried the captain. Damage report, he ordered. Ventral turret destroyed. Railgun mounts 2 and 5 destroyed. Mount 9 damaged, but functional. Autocannon mounts 11, 13, 23, and 25 destroyed. Hammerhead launchers 3 and 8 destroyed. The tech checked the screen before continuing. Explosive decompressions on decks 3 and 5. Explosive decompression in medbay. Ablative armor badly damaged and penetrated in around 20 spots. Engine #3 is down. Power unstable in many areas of the ship. FTL down. Engineering needs an hour to fix. The jump drive is destroyed. Long-range comms are down. The tech finished. Casualty reports, Captain Krall ordered. A different tech replied. 249 dead, roughly 800 wounded, with 327 too injured to fight. Thank you, he returned. Doing the math in his head, he had just over 1,300 combat effective, and 482 of those were his Marines. The other 18 were left behind. After thinking a moment, Helm, same course as before, but since we can't go to FTL, circle to the aft of the command ship and lessen the incoming fire for the moment. Looking over to the comms tech, get me the chief engineer on the horn. Tapping the switch on the console, he called down to Tactical. XO, I'm taking us around to the aft of the command ship and play peekaboo. We'll pass on her port side, and I want a broadside from all batteries that can hit it and launch half the Shrikes we have left at it. After we get to their rear, target enemy aft batteries. I want them all hunks of twisted metal. Captain Krall ordered, Aye, sir. Lieutenant Commander Ricci replied, Ammo count update, sir. Go ahead, he replied. Only the 2 forward tubes are loaded, aft tubes empty, railgun and autocannon are down to 30%. Dorsal turret is at 10%, but they are working on transferring surviving ammo from the ventral turret. We can launch 4 more full racks of Shrikes and 5 plus hammerheads. She finished, Understood. Thank you. Captain Krall replied, Captain, Chief Engineer on the line. A tech relayed, Route it to my console, he ordered. I need you to place charges on the computer core, all the experimental equipment, engines, and fire suppression control. If we go down, I don't want them getting a damn thing but blood and pain. Aye, sir, the chief replied. Captain Krall turned back to watch as the Roanoke passed the command ship to port. He watched as massive explosions rippled across the enemy flank and dorsal surface. They were too close for the point defense to pick off the majority of the Shrikes. As the Roanoke got behind and slightly below the enemy command ship, she slowed and allowed her surviving batteries to silence the command ship's aft batteries. Captain Krall called down to Tactical, XO, fire half our remaining hammerheads into her engines. Affirmative, replied the XOO. Captain Krall watched as the hammerheads impacted the command ship's engines and saw the thrust nozzles dim as the engines went offline. The enemy battery stopped firing and she began to drift. Helm, get us 500 kilometers from the command ship and line up to fire our last 2 avalanche torpedoes, Captain Krall ordered. Aye, sir, 500 km bow towards the enemy, the helmsman repeated. The captain called down to Tactical. Nana, we're positioning the ship to line up the front tubes, and we're going to kill that bastard. Stay on the line and fire on my order. Aye, sir. We're ready. The XO answered. Helm? Captain Krall asked. 3 seconds, Captain. The helmsman replied. Captain Krall watched, and as soon as he got the angle he wanted, Fire torpedoes, he commanded. Helm, get us the hell out of here. Maybe we can outrun the bigger ships and buy time to fix the FTL. Captain Krall ordered, but before the helmsman could act, there was a massive jolt. What the hell? He yelled. A tech answered, We were rammed by a NLX cruiser and several smaller ships are closing in. But instead of ramming the Roanoke, they launched breaching pods. His finger stabbed down to open the intercom. All hands, prepare to repel boarders. Security teams, Tactical will relay their access position, he ordered. He pulled out his sidearm and checked that it was ready. Several other techs did the same, while his security detachment moved to defensive positions to watch the hatch. Target those pods, Captain Krall ordered, but he didn't need to say it. His gunnery crews were on it. Here and there, a brief flash of light marked the destruction of a pod. XO, fire all remaining missiles. Pick your targets, he commanded. All batteries, open fire. He left the TAC net open to track the status of the enemy boarding parties. He listened to the cacophony of noises coming over the TAC net. Security Team Alpha to Section 7, Level 3. Bravo Team Section 2, Level 1, Charlie Team Section 12, Level 5, Lieutenant Commander Ricci ordered. There's too many. Fall back to Position 2. An unidentified voice ordered another voice, firmly stated, Hold your ground, nothing gets past us. Theta Team down, a handful of Nalex heading for engineering, a panicked voice exclaimed, and dozens of others just like it, always with the sound of combat in the background. Captain, more breaching pods en route, a tech exclaimed. Get me the chief engineer, the captain ordered. At the chief engineer's response, he ordered, Detonate all sabotage charges except the main computer. Set that one on a manual trigger at my console with a 20-minute timer as a backup. And then set the reactors to overload. We're not going to hold the ship much longer. And set a charge to breach the hull and decompress engineering as soon as you are clear. Affirmative, Captain. She was a good ship, the chief replied, turning to his bridge crew. Give the order to abandon ship. Have all the pods head for the station. The captain called tactical. Lieutenant Commander Ricci, all hands abandon ship. Get as many of them home as you can. I understand, sir. She answered, I'll see you at the station. She said hopefully, I'm afraid not, Nana. I'm the captain, and I'm going down with my ship, he stated, and someone needs to make sure they can't shut down the overload. Transfer all fire controls to my station and get the hell out of here. Aye, sir, it's been an honor, the XO replied. The honor is all mine. You are going to make an excellent captain. Goodbye, my friend. Captain Crowell finished. His bridge crew tried to convince him to go with them, but he declined and ordered security to get them into the escape pods. Then he sat and watched as his consoles began reporting each pod as it launched. He also kept an eye on his sensors and concentrated fire on any Nalex ship that was moving to intercept the pods. They knew better than to fire on them, but nothing said they couldn't capture them. He also prepared a probe with all the ship logs and combat data and fired it toward human-held territory. It would run silently until it exited the system and then begin broadcasting a coded signal for pickup. He was dismayed at how few pods had left the ship and regretted so many young lives had been cut short. As he saw the last pod clear the battlefield, he sat back for a moment and then triggered the charge on the main computer. A hard pounding came from the other side of the hatchway, but there wasn't enough power to open it. He guessed the pinging on the door was them firing their lasers and trying to blast it open. He wondered if it would work, but a huge rumble, a bright flash, interrupted, and the long career of Captain Crowell was finally over. News of the Roanoke's final battle flashed across news channels on hundreds of worlds. Her courageous and foolhardy charge at a superior force, the damage she did to the Nalex fleet before her destruction. How, of the 1859 members of the crew that went into the battle, only 108 survived. The videos taken from both sides during the battle played over and over again. How the Nalex picked up all the escape pods and released them on the station immediately, and even recovered the bodies of any human they found while gathering their dead. Nalex losses were the command ship, 2 capital ships, 9 sub-capitals destroyed, and a dozen other vessels damaged in one form or another. Nalex casualties were over 50,000 dead. Only the Nalex's immense respect for courage, audacity, and bravery in the face of danger kept the skirmish from blowing up into a war. The Nalex rendered full military honors as they turned the human dead over to Lieutenant Commander Ricci. The Captain Crawl, a Grenville-class cruiser, was launched 2 years later. Captain Nana Ricci in command.